you all so much for joining us today. I'll introduce you to your panel. We have Samson Williams, who is the president of Crowdfunding Professionals Association, Robin Sosnow, who is the founding partner of Sosnow and Associates, PLLC, Rob Ringerman, who is the founder and president of SMC Consulting, Stephen Holtzman, who's a partner of Lewis Brisbois, and Brad Hamilton, our host, who is the founder and editor of the Hatch Institute. So Brad, I'm going to turn this panel over to you.
Thank you so much, Rivka, and welcome to you all, and welcome to our webinar. So what are we talking about? What is this all about today? I think most people who are in business are aware of crowdfunding as a good option for raising money. Often it's in small amounts. You get, a campaign going. Friends, family, fans of a business might kick in $10 or $50 or whatever it might be. They're basically contributing because they want to support your enterprise. And what they get out of it, maybe some goodies like a t-shirt, but basically they're doing it as a way to help your business. They want to help you and they want to help your business, which is obviously very different from selling shares, for example, in your business, or bringing in an investor who will raise money through private equity, which is something that not all startups might necessarily pursue. However, there is this very interesting middle ground between those two options, and it's called Regulation CF, or Reg CF Crowdfunding. And it's a way for a business to raise money from supporters primarily, but in larger amounts than you might necessarily or normally attract via Kickstarter, for example, or GoFundMe. This is a more formalized way, but it basically taps into that base of support that any business naturally has generated. You're going to have to give up some equity, and there's some reporting requirements, but generally the terms are very much in your favor. So that's what makes this such an attractive option, particularly now when businesses need an infusion of cash to get going or to reinvigorate their operations as we emerge from the pandemic. So that's the basic overview of today's topic. If you're not familiar with crowdfunding, Reg CF crowdfunding, you are going to be. And I'd like to start now with our panelist, Robin, who knows a fair amount about this. So maybe, Robin, you can give us some basic overviews of what Reg CF crowdfunding is and what types of businesses typically take advantage of Reg CF.
Hey there. Thanks, Brad. Super happy to be here and exciting to be sharing this information. I think it's a really timely discussion that we're having, for mostly because this week was the week where the amendments to regulation crowdfunding and some of the other Jobs Act exemptions came into effect. And I'm sure we'll be getting more into what those changes are as the discussion ensues. So what are we talking about here? What is regulation crowdfunding? So to set the stage, I'll just begin by commenting that regulation crowdfunding is a pretty new securities exemption that came into effect in 2016. It is part of and had formerly been Title III of the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act, which was approved with bipartisan support in 2012 and signed into law by Barack Obama in the same year. Regulation crowdfunding was a major innovation and continues to create a lot of opportunity in the market because it allows retail investor participation. So what does that mean? Retail investor participation means that non-accredited investors, so non-high net worth individuals, can now participate and invest in private company financing. This is really a big deal. It really didn't exist before 2016. Retail investors like you and me, we were able to invest in private companies when they went public, or perhaps in a resale transaction on a secondary market, which there's very limited activity there. So if you weren't working for a big tech company and you weren't given options or RSUs or some other kind of equity award in that business, you really didn't get the opportunity to participate at an early stage and potentially the next unicorn business. So the Jobs Act and regulation crowdfunding set the stage for an influx of capital into privately owned businesses by the retail investing public. So you asked me what kind of businesses are well suited for this exemption. And the truth of the matter is that any business that's formed and domiciled in the United States has the potential to rely on regulation crowdfunding. We could be talking about a startup company. So startup thinking high growth, big valuation, high growth tech company, or mom and pop small businesses also can make use of this exemption. So we have pizzerias, bars and restaurants, film projects, real estate syndication. Then we have our fintech players, our crypto players, the funding portals of the world, who all also taken advantage of regulation crowdfunding. The reason why this exemption can work for everyone is because you don't necessarily have to sell equity securities when conducting a capital raise in reliance on regulation crowdfunding, right? Different types of securities instruments fit different kinds of businesses, depending on what their model is. So for an early stage tech company, as an early stage investor, you might want a convertible note or a safe, something to really cut you in on the upside when that company conducts its next financing and hopefully ultimately exits at a massive multiple of the pricing at which you came in. But for a mom and pop restaurant, hardware store, pizzeria that's not really looking to scale, they still may be revenue positive and have a different kind of security instrument that's more fitting for their business model, like a revenue participation agreement, or even just a debt security like a promissory note. So hopefully that sets the stage and gives everybody kind of an idea and direction where we can take the conversation from here.
Well, it sounds like, Robin, what you're talking about is a way for a business to leverage or take advantage of an existing customer base, where people who know and like the business or are introduced to the business for the first time but are attracted to what you're doing can participate as an investor. They can put in money and help the owner of this business get started or to ramp up what they're doing. Is that right?
I definitely agree with that observation. As you pointed out in your introduction, we have rewards crowdfunding where people who are fans and supporters of businesses and concepts can put in money early with no expectation of a receipt of a security, but rather a pre-order of a product or even just a donation for someone that they care about in their community. Equity crowdfunding allows founders to leverage that same community, whether that's their friends and family, their user base, or their prospective user base. And rather than allowing them to pre-order or gain access to something, they actually get some kind of security interest in the business, whether that's debt or equity or hybrid security like a note or a convertible note or a safe.
And how much can you raise when you do this?
Great question. So until the 15th of this month, companies could raise $1,070,000 per 12-month period. Now, as of the 15th, companies can raise up to $5 million per 12-month period.
That's quite a substantial increase, as well as an attractive goal, particularly if you're talking about either like a brand new startup or a business that's mom and pop, where a couple $100,000 or $500,000 could make a huge difference in what they're able to do. So the question that I think most businesses that would be considering this, one of the questions anyway, would be like, how much is this going to cost me? What do I have to do to actually make this happen? What are the upfront costs?
That's a great question as well. So first of all, you don't have to go for the full 5 million, right? That is just the maximum. You could, if you needed it, you could go for the full 5 million in your first shot, but you could also start with a much smaller piece and see how that goes and leverage that money and come back at it later with better terms for you, as a founder of that business. As far as costs go, the costs that founders experience when looking to work with this exemption fall in a couple of different buckets. So in order to conduct a crowdfunding offering, you have to work with a funding portal. And the funding portal is the website where your crowdfunding campaign lives and where all of the investment activity takes place. Some funding portals charge upfront fees, onboarding fees, just to cover their costs in getting your campaign live. Other funding portals, they don't do that. They only capture fees on the back end in the form of cash and securities, or sometimes just cash. Additionally, to the extent that you're raising more than $535,000, so if you're seeking to raise more than $535,000 and you're a first-time issuer, you need reviewed financials. Depending on your company's operating history, the cost for a financial review by an independent CPA can vary. We're thinking, somewhere between $2,500 and maybe $7,500, depending on that complexity. And then the final bucket is legal. And depending on whether you have in-house legal or you're looking to engage a law firm that is focused on equity crowdfunding, then there's that expense as well. And that depends in part on what type of company you are, your operating history, what type of security you're offering, and a couple of other factors. But I would put that in the range of $5,000 to, let's say, $20,000 on the high end, really depending on your positioning and your goals.
So it sounds like the funding portal is the key to this all. They will guide you through it. They will help you figure out what you have to do to launch a campaign. Is that correct?
Yes. Without the engagement of a funding portal, your campaign cannot go live.
And what typically do you see in terms of what people will raise versus what they have to spend in upfront cost? And also, if you could address kind of what happens at the back end, how much equity are they giving up?
They're all great questions. So different companies, are approaching this with different strategies. That's part of what's so great about regulation crowdfunding. It's not that everyone has to fall within a certain model for this to make sense. You could be a local, I want to go with alcoholic beverage establishment, but I know that there are restrictions on ownership in different states and it can get complicated. So let's just put them in a vacuum and say, your local liquor store wants to raise $100,000 to help cover some of the costs that they just incurred when they were, closed and what have you. And with a capital raise of $100,000, they don't necessarily need to go spend tens of thousands of dollars on marketing, right? They've got a loyal followership in Gramercy Park neighborhood, and they're pretty confident that they're going to be able to just raise it based on their newsletter list. So that's an example where their upfront fees are really limited to portal fees, legal fees, and not even needing a set of reviewed financials because they're raising under $107,000. And that's a pretty light touch offering. Another big benefit of the rule change is that these companies can now test the waters. So that means that if you're dabbling in the idea of doing this, you can actually set up a landing page or go out and communicate via email, social media, what have you, conduct a survey, do some market research to see whether your users and your community are actually interested in investing in your business before you go and spend some of those upfront sunk costs associated with the campaign. We have clients that have raised the million, that have spent large amounts of money doing so, primarily on marketing. And we have other clients that have done enough of their own grassroots business development and networking that their newsletter lists and their community base was engaged enough to come in and fill the round. Right now, the market is particularly hot. We're seeing our clients basically selling out on funding portals like WeFunder, Start Engine, and Republic. Republic, by the way, is one of these funding portals that they just announced yesterday, series financing of something like 32 million or 35 million. They're really well capitalized. They're a New York City based funding portal, and they're there to help. So just a slight plug on them. Yeah,
Oh,
I'll sit there.
Okay, good. There's a lot of great information. So thank you, Robin. One thing that I think is kind of interesting to hear about is a real world example of how this might actually be playing out for someone who's going through the process. And with that, I want to turn it over to Steve, because Steve, you're going through that right now with a client, and it's a kind of a first time thing. So wondering if you could relate a little bit about what's happening with your experience now in going through a Reg CF campaign.
Well, thank you very much, Brad, and thank you, Robin, for that great overview. Our client was very closely following the recent developments, and in particular, the approval by the SEC in early November of the new rules. The vote passed only by a 3-2 basis. So when President Biden was elected, there was some concern in the crowdfunding community in January that the rules could be impacted somehow, but that never came to pass. And fortunately, they went into effect on Monday. As has been noted, equity crowdfunding is a relatively new type of raising capital. And as of last year, I think during 2020, only $240 million was raised through equity crowdfunding. So that is a much smaller number than other types of financing. For example, I think the other types of crowdfunding that you mentioned, donation-based or rewards-based financing, have raised maybe a total of $34 billion throughout the world. So our client was not necessarily initially focused when he was thinking of raising money on crowdfunding, but he had a strategic advisor who convinced them that it was a good way to go. My clients are basically more seasoned entrepreneurs who have focused on other types of traditional fundraising, loans, things like that in the past. But our clients didn't realize it, but they're really well prepared for crowdfunding. They developed a product, they obtained patents, they had sold product, they developed a distribution system, so they're well qualified to go out and be attractive to investors. Now, specifically with respect to what they're doing for crowdfunding, the first thing they did was decide to give a 20% discount to initial investors. And we think, we haven't gone active yet, but we think that will be a huge boost and an incentive for people to get in, look at the company, understand it, and hopefully sell out and then move into the regular funding phase. As has been noted, many companies do offer some kind of a perk or reward. Our client is not doing that because their product is really not conducive to doing that kind of thing. But they have prepared a 2-minute video. Most companies do that. It's called a sizzle video. And hopefully that will help market the company as well. Another thing they've done, they've obtained a lead investor who will put a significant amount of investment in the company, and he'll explain to other potential investors why he did that. And that lead investor and one other investor should help the company meet its target offering amount, which is the minimum amount that a company has to raise before the offering can proceed and the company can receive the money. If the target amount is not satisfied, then all the money has to go back to the investors and the company gets none of it. So that's something to be very concerned about.
Let me just, can I interrupt you just there for a minute, because that is an important point to bring up. Part of the experience of going through a Reg CF campaign is setting a goal, having a particular goal which you set. And then once that goal has been set, you've got to meet that amount for the money to flow to the company. But I think that if I'm not mistaken, for the most part, just about all of these campaigns are successful in the sense that they've set a realistic goal. They've given themselves enough time and bandwidth to ramp up with the sizzle reel and the other things that they have to do, the regulations that are required to get ready for it. So it sounds like in most cases, even if it's an ambitious goal of 100 or 500,000, whatever it might be, most of these companies, when they do a CF raise, they're actually meeting their goal because it's become realistic and they've gone through the process of figuring out what to do before they launch a campaign. Is that accurate?
Well, I think it's accurate. It's hard to know if that minimum amount will really be sufficient to achieve the company's goals.
And that's part of that's also part of the application process, and isn't it? You have to explain to these equity investors what it is that you're going to do with the money you raise.
Exactly. You have to. The SEC requires that you provide a use of proceeds. How much is going to pay professionals? How much is going to development of the product, marketing of the product, all of the different key elements that you're going to use the proceeds for.
And is that difficult to prepare? Is that hard to do for a company to put all that information together?
Not usually, because they know what they need the money for, especially new companies. But
Gotcha.
They know whether they need to file a patent or they need to market the product or whatever. So, and they're living with it every day.
We've talked a little bit about what a raise might be in terms of what it costs you on the back end, as far as a percentage of the company or equity or shares or whatever it might be. Can you give us an example or give us a basic idea of the client that you're working with? What was their thought about what that part of the puzzle would be?
Well, they're offering up to 20% of the company. So, and then, but out of those proceeds, the funding portal takes a percentage of some of the funds too. So not all of the funds will go to them, but most of them will.
And are they satisfied with this? Has it been going well? What have the challenges been, if any?
That's a good question. The company really hasn't had what I would call a challenge, meaning an obstacle that was difficult to overcome. But I would say that the assembling the financials has been the biggest time consumer. Originally, because the company's raising $2 million, they need to have financially reviewed statements from a certified public accountant. And as part of that process, initially they were just going to form a new marketing company, put enough money into it for an opening balance sheet, and then have that easily reviewed by a CPA. But after consideration, they decided to go with their operating company, which has been in business since 2016. So obtaining reviewed financial statements for 2019 and 2020 has been a project for them, and they've recently completed that, but it was somewhat of a time-consuming process. Probably the most time-consuming element of the whole process.
Okay, well, but it's good to know that they're moving forward, and good to hear that the experience has been positive. Rob, if you don't mind, I'd like to get you involved in this. I think that there are some issues that might possibly be somewhat discouraging or present new challenges for a business that's looking to get involved in a CF campaign, a Reg CF campaign. We've heard in the past, we've heard from Steve about preparing a statement, sizzle reel, but there are other things that potentially could be something of a challenge for a young business, a valuation perhaps, or a cap table. Can you tell us a little bit about how, Rob, if you could tell us a little bit about how one can get started in this without being overwhelmed by some of the requirements?
Thanks, Brad. It's great to be here and sharing the stage with some excellent colleagues here. My career, I kind of have advised range of public companies down to solopreneurs. As a public company, there's all sorts of different considerations, but for early stage companies, I think you want to go to advisors like Robin and Steve, and go through, look at who your past investors have been. I've talked to a lot of companies that have gone through and advised companies that have considered crowdfunding, and jumped in. And a lot of times there's issues with some past investors. For example, be very careful. This is kind of a word to the wise for early stage companies. A lot of them go the accelerator or incubator route, but make sure you read these contracts extremely carefully. Talk to companies that were promised, X number of dollars, say it's $150,000, but a lot of that can be kind of payment in kind, where you're actually getting kind of their advice. It's not actually a cash outlay from from the business, and there's all varying degrees of knowledge that gets imparted. Sometimes it's office space, sometimes it's hand holding through the capital raising, introductions to prospective investors and things like that. Also want to talk about, Robin mentioned three, which I believe are the three leading portals, and Start Engine, which is interesting because people know Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank. He's now involved with them, and he's done some education, a lot of the best portals. And it's worth noting that the top three are in 2020 accounted for 80% of the money raised through Regulation CF. So I think as a founder early stage company, you want to ask yourself, do we want to be, a smaller fish in a bigger pond, or possibly a bigger pond and a smaller, a bigger fish in a small pond. But also a thing to think about is, you need to be very proactive as a company raising capital to bring your community, and this is at the base of it all about community, and money you spend on marketing is doubly good in terms of promoting your business and your company, creating, stimulating your brand ambassadors and influencers. You want to be in touch with bloggers, you want to be in touch with trade publications, and just kind of get the word out on your business.
Sounds like
And,
sounds like what you're saying is the more that you can do as a business, the better your chances of fulfilling your goal.
right. Yeah, your success, you're going to have to bring a lot to it, and don't kind of jump in the pool right away. Talk to other founders. A lot of them are willing to give you advice. Network as much as you can. Talk to people who aren't happy with a given platform. I know some of the platforms have account managers that kind of guide you through helping put together your sizzle reel, and also your marketing materials. Don't overdo it. Be authentic. Make sure your video kind of tells the story that you want to, and that you're going to be appealing. Make sure you know who you're appealing to, and at the high end of your business, you want to be targeting people who care about you.
Yeah,
And
that's good.
find the right platform.
That's excellent advice, I have to say, Rob, because I think that authenticity is kind of at the core of what crowdfunding is all about, right? You're authentically communicating what it is that you love about your business and what you provide to the public. And those people who are interested in supporting you financially are those who respond to that type of approach. So I agree with that. What you're talking about here is basically sweat equity. You're putting in the time to put together these elements for your raise. What about the nuts and bolts of the dollars? Let's say you want to raise a certain amount. Let's say it's $100,000. What can you expect as far as what the cash outlay and the costs are collectively? What does that result with in terms of a return on investment? Are you going to spend $10,000? Are you going to spend $20,000? What's the sort of general ROI on a CF raise like this?
based on, conversations with founders and portals, a rule of thumb, and this is going to vary, is, maybe 20% of what you're going to raise can go towards, marketing expense. But, take advantage of all different types of, earned media. And, I think you want to plan well in advance what you're going to do and kind of time announcements along the way. And you want to kind of jump, it's kind of the FOMO, the fear of missing out. When people are looking on these portals, Start Engine, Republic, and WeFinder, they're seeing lots of investments. One of the things I love about Republic is they kind of categorize, different, like, LGBTQ, social impact, people of color, what sector you're in, et cetera. So you can, search as an investor for what you're looking for, and you can be, in that category. And you want to look at, as a founder who's going to list your company to raise capital, you want to look and see what everybody else is, which are the most successful campaigns and why. See if you can talk to them, talk to the people from, the portals, and see if kind of, you can be a squeaky wheel here. They're vetting you and you're vetting them too. You want them to know that you have a choice of which platform to go on. And but you want to prepare well in advance. And ideally, I think Steve mentioned that somebody had a lead investor. If you can, get the thermometer moving up right off the bat, people are going to be attracted to those. A lot of the listings have the best momentum behind them, or, which are the new ones, which ones are closing soon. There's all different ways they characterize them.
Great advice there.
Yeah.
That's really great advice. So you do your due diligence, do some comparison shopping when it comes to a funding portal. Make sure that it's a right fit for what they do and what you want to do. Can
I jump in on that point, on the funding portal point?
Please.
Okay. So Rob brought up, that I had mentioned the 3 big players who had accounted for 80% of the industry, and we're also talking about cost. So I just want to mention 2 additional points. There are more than 50 funding portals out there holding licenses, and many of them are startups, just like your, I'm speaking to the crowd here, just like your businesses. They're looking to compete in this somewhat cornered market. And many of them are very niche. It might be more aligned with your business's specific industry, as opposed to being like a generic, all over the board funding portal. So I think it's worth exploring, beyond the big 3, really taking a look at some of the more niche players. For example, there's a water-focused funding portal out of Detroit called Waterworks that's completely committed to that sector. So if you have a business that's touching the water infrastructure or water tech space, they might be a better fit for you. The other reason to look at these other competitive portals is because there's more flexibility on fees when working with maybe a lesser known player. And particularly if you're a business that's intending to bring its own crowd, which you really should be if you're getting involved in this space, then compensating the funding portal for the like 20 or 30% tranche that they bring in, but with the 60 or 70% or 80% tranche that you bring in, right, becomes less attractive. So to lower your cost of capital, you want to be as competitive as possible in the pricing that you pay to the funding portal. So I know I had mentioned the 3 and then they've been played around with, but there are others. There's a site on the FINRA website. There's a URL where you can actually see all of the registered funding portals. And then beyond that, there's a group that are broker dealers that aren't listed there, but are also permitted to provide funding portal activities.
Great.
So just a little plug, and I'll share that link in the chat.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if we can put those links into the chat, people can look at them. I also, when you're talking about this, Robin, I began to wonder, are there review sites? Are there places where people who have raised money with different portals have posted comments favorably or unfavorably about the portals they've worked with?
I'm not sure of those.
All right, well, we'll look into that. How about How about the nuts and bolts of this actual process, right? So from what I'm hearing, it's a take it or leave it type of proposition. Just for example, hey, this is my hardware business. I need to raise 100,000. I'm willing to give up 10% equity. This is the sort of the scope and of what I'm going to do and what I'm going to use this money for. How do you yard down on that? How do you figure out what the right proposal is when you're preparing to do a campaign? And I'll let anyone answer that one. Maybe Rob
Yeah.
or Samson, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure, not a problem. So I love this whole conversation. So I'm taking notes there in the chat to remind myself to pay attention, number one. And number two, make sure that we cover the things. And so if you're a business, a founder, you are going to be known as an issuer in this space because you're going to issue some type of security. And it's very similar to going on Shark Tank. If you're going to take your business on Shark Tank, you need your sizzle reel. Stephen was talking about your sizzle reel because you need to inspire your communities, your fans to want to invest in your business. So your terms do need to be attractive. They do need to show some kind of ROI or upside. And again, it's like you have this much of a pie, you're going to offer this percentage to your customers and your fans so that they become investors. And investors, where you take your customer investor and now they're an investor. You're going to have a little bit of easier time. I'm waiting for this restaurant down in South Florida to do a crowdfunding campaign because they already get about $1,000 a year out of me just because they're a restaurant and I love eating there. So when one of their perks is I get a half off discount or I get preferred seating at a table, they're going to get an extra $2 or $3 grand out of me because I'm going to eat there anyhow. And so you do have to remember, you have to make your deal attractive to your potential investors. You don't need to raise up to $5 million. Most small businesses, they need to raise around $250,000 to actually help grow and scale their business. There are some businesses that do need to raise 5 million. There's even some businesses that can show that if they raise doing what's called a Reg A plus or have a Reg D sidecar, where they're going to raise $75 million or $100 million or more. But for most businesses, you're around that $250,000, $500,000. And you just need to make sure that whatever your terms are, that people would want to be interested and they'll see the upside. So you got to keep that in mind.
You know, you bring up something really interesting to me, Samson, which is that the idea here is that you're combining a couple of different things, right? You're raising money, but you're offering that piece of the pie to your investors, but you're also possibly growing the business by making those investors feel special about what happens when they come in contact with your business. So whether it's, you know, a discount or preferred seating, you know, or one drink off at your local bar or something like that, or even like you'll become part of like sort of a new membership club, right? Which gives you often early information about deals and things like that. I mean, it sounds like there's a whole world of ways of cross-promoting when you start thinking about how you can work with a CF campaign.
So yeah, I was looking for my notes because I have 6 points of why any business should consider engaging in an equity crowdfunding or an investment crowdfunding campaign. We have to say investment crowdfunding because you might issue equities, you might do revenue share, you might do debt. So we want to be all inclusive, say investment crowdfunding campaign. So the number one reason, I have an article, I'll drop a link down to this. Number one reason that you want to engage in a crowdfunding campaign is recruiting customers. That's actually it. You're actually going to recruit customers because with customers comes sales. If you have an existing product, you definitely want to sell them your existing product. Say, hey, if you love our pen so much, you should buy it. If you love it so much that you use it, you can also invest in our company over here. What that does is it creates lifelong brand loyalty. When you've got that lifelong brand loyalty, it helps reduce what's called your customer acquisition cost. If you run a business, you're spending tons of money on marketing. What you really want is you want a customer to give you a word of mouth referral. And that's where some magic happens. Because again, if you're not spending money on marketing, you're saving that money, and saved money is called revenue. And what this does is it brings us to this fifth point of supercharging your organic growth. There's a common myth that, oh, you don't want thousands of people on your cap table. Yes, you absolutely do. You want 20,000 people on your cap table, because when you have 20,000 of your customers or your community who's invested into your business, you have 20,000 people who are doing free marketing for you, who are making word of mouth referrals, who are driving business and traffic to your business. Whether you're a restaurant, you sell pens, whatever your business is, those people are driving traffic to your business. And then, which brings us to the 6th point, and then I'll let you talk. The 6th point of engaging in an investment crowdfunding campaign is actually maybe to raise money. Because what you see for the smaller campaigns is there's this gentleman named Michael Lloyd from Dope Coffee. He only raised $85,000, but he had a 30% increase in sales. And so if you only raise X in capital, but you increase your sales, that's a beautiful thing, because revenue, our sales revenue, is the best capital in the world. What were we going to say, Brad?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. And so one of the things that I feel like might be daunting to some people is thinking about creating a cap table. So you mentioned the idea of a cap table, which is essentially just all of the people who have invested, who have a piece of the pie of your business, right? So normally, if you're going out into the investment world, you want a small cap table because the institutional investor wants to take that big piece. But now you're talking about a very different dynamic where your cap table it essentially reflects the strength of your business as well as the ability to cross promote. However, I would say that a number of businesses have never really thought about a cap table, particularly mom and pops. They're like, what's a cap table? I've never done a cap table. How daunting is it to create a cap table in your view?
It's actually not that daunting, because folks like Robin and Roy, I know they do legal things, but they can still help you as part of their consulting and advisory. And if I'm putting words in your mouth, just correct me there, Robin and Roy. But that's where you might want to get a consultant to help you come up with your business plan and your cap table. Because oddly enough, I tell this to people, raising money is not your business. So running your business is your business. Again, you make pens, you run a restaurant, that's your business. So when you go to raise money, your cap table, very brief way to think about this, going back to Shark Tank, and part of your homework, go watch an hour of the YouTube of Shark Tank. Because they walk out, they say, hypothetically, hey, I have a pen company. I did $1 million in sales last year. My pen company is worth $1 million. I'm looking for $100,000 for a 10% investment in my pen company. So and so that's your valuation. And then it goes to how many people are on your cap table, because they say, do you have any other investors? And this is where you might say, hey, my auntie gave me $10,000. My brother gave me $5,000. Those are the people who are typically on your cap table. But can get with Rob, get with Roy, get with Robin. Apparently, if you're in the consulting business, you have an R at the front of your name. And they can help you walk through, like, here's all the documents. Particularly, I know we mentioned this earlier, when it comes to testing the waters, definitely want to call Robin first before you go to test the waters, because there's some really nuances for the SEC, and we don't want you to get in trouble.
Definitely not. No one wants to get into trouble. But another one of those things that you need to think about is the valuation. That's sort of how you figure out what you're going to offer and what kind of terms are going to be put together before you do your crowdfunding raise. That's another document, a valuation that you need help with. Is that, how difficult is it to get a good valuation for your company?
You've probably all been familiar. Roy's here. He can tell you about title is vital in the real estate market. So if you've ever gone to buy or sell a house, you look for comparables of your neighbor, like, oh, it's in this neighborhood, it's a 3-bedroom, 4-bathroom, etc. If you're trying to value your business, find out in your industry, what are the comparable ones? What do they have? And so that's that starting point. But then you have to look at what are your assets. And assets could be, do you own a physical building? Do you have a Twitter account because you've been the best-selling taco truck in Houston, Texas, Los Locos Tacos, by the way, in Spring, Texas. If you have 20,000 people on your Twitter account who are your customers, that's an asset. And so you have to think, when I convert these customers into investors, what's that worth? So at a high level, when you go to do your valuation, and I'll provide a link to a few videos about valuation, you need to think, what are my comparable businesses worth in my industry that are of the same size? Don't tell me you're worth $9 billion because Stripe is worth $9 billion and you do the same thing. It's scaled down now that there's only 2 people in your business. How much are you reasonably worth? Because again, when you go to the investors, when you go to the crowd, you do need to tell them some reasonable terms, that there's a reasonable expectation that, oh, if I invest this $100, $500, $1,000, I'm going to have perhaps either lose it all, because it is investing, or have an upside of X.
Exactly. It's all about risk reward for sure. Hey, Robin, I wanted to also ask you about something else, which we haven't really addressed yet.
I would love to just add one little clarifying remark to what's being discussed, because I want everyone to understand that while we're talking about valuations and we're talking about slices of a piece of the pie, we're setting the stage as if this is all about equity. And regulation crowdfunding does not require that you sell ownership, today in your business to anyone. And not all businesses are even well suited to be selling equity. There are other kinds of securities instruments that are also feasible. If you were to, for example, sell a revenue participation loan, you wouldn't be giving up equity at the moment that you sell the note, and you also wouldn't be giving up equity later, right? You'd be cutting investors in on a portion of your revenue or a portion of your profits until that loan was repaid up to a certain multiple.
Do you recommend that option over equity?
I think that this is a really specific question for the business to consider, for us to consider, and for the business to consider for itself, depending on how they're positioned in the market. So a restaurant, for example, should not necessarily be using a convertible note or a SAFE if they're not planning to scale, right? Those securities are really better suited for high growth businesses that anticipate on raising a series financing in the future. A restaurant or a retail establishment or even a consumer product that's revenue positive, right, that can afford to cut investors in a little bit on their margins until such time as there's a certain multiple, let's call it like 1.5x or 2x of that loan amount repaid. That could be a much better pathway for them, and it gives investors the upside of this immediate cash flow, a multiple on their money over a projected time period. And then that's it. They're not long-term, holders of equity securities in this business that may or may not ever exit. Equity, and selling priced equity is really appropriate for businesses that have already conducted series financings, seed stage financings, or at a point where they're looking to maybe do their Series A, and because now regulation crowdfunding allows up to 5 million, maybe they're trying to do their Series A using priced equity. Let's call it Series A non-voting preferred stock. But outside of that scenario, I would really encourage businesses to look at convertible securities instruments for startups and for revenue participation structures, or even debt for small businesses.
Right. Good. Those are great points. It sounds like the specifics are the determining factor, like where you are in your arc as a company, where you've gone as far as past raises, and where you're heading toward as far as revenue and growth. Yes. So it sounds like you got to take all of those things into consideration. Now, speaking of different options, one thing we haven't gotten into, and perhaps Robin, you can address this, is that there are two different types of people, or companies actually, that come to this CF Reg option. One is those that are doing it for the first time, and the other is the repeat customer, someone who's doing it for the second or third time. Can you explain a little bit about the differences between those two types?
Yeah, so when a company is crowdfunding for the first time, they get the benefit of not needing to obtain an audit of their financials if they're raising more than $535,000, right? And that reviewed financial statement I referenced earlier that we were discussing kind of at length about the timeline that it can often take for those to be obtained. A review is satisfactory. For a second time issuer who's looking to raise more than $535,000, they have to obtain an audit of their financial statements. And that's just a more costly and time-consuming exercise, and involves a more in-depth review by their CPA firm.
Got it. Okay, cool. How about there's also a requirement that's called a Form C. What is a Form C? Maybe somebody can jump in and talk about the Form C requirement.
Sure, this is Steve. Basically, the Form C is the way, it's the document by which the investor learns about the company, and makes the company transparent to the investor. So it's, there are a bunch of questions, nothing difficult about it, but there are a lot of questions and just issues to address as you're filling it out. One way, excuse me, for somebody to not start out with a Form C is to test the waters, as we've discussed, so they can determine if there's interest in the company, in the offering, before actually proceeding with the Form C.
Got it. Okay.
So what I thought I would do is just identify maybe 10 of the items that have to go into a Form C. Some of them we've already discussed, and just to give a flavor of the types of things that are required. Naturally, the names of the directors and officers. You want to know about the background of the management of the company. You also have to disclose each person who's a 20% beneficial owner in the company. So what's a beneficial owner? If I own 15% of the company, but I have the right to vote the shares of other people, that can put me over the 20% threshold, even though I don't own that much equity. So that's what a beneficial owner is. You have to, as we've talked about, discuss the risks of the company. Every company has risks, from Amazon down to the smallest company. Are you a new company? What experience do you have? Are you losing money? Can you, who are your competitors? What data privacy concerns do you have? All those kinds of the primary risks that each company has need to be disclosed. We talked about, excuse me, the target offering amount. You have to have that minimum amount before the offering can proceed, and the company can keep the funds. A description, as we've talked about, of the use of proceeds. How are those funds going to be used? Disclosure of the terms of the securities. As Robin was talking about, is it convertible debt? Is it a safe? Is it stock? Is it preferred stock? Whatever it is has to be described in detail. How the securities offered are valued. And we've talked about that somewhat. There's nothing wrong with saying the securities have been the securities price has been arbitrarily determined by the company. That happens all the time. Mm-hmm. If you have an ongoing company with revenues, then you can price it based on the performance of the company. To the extent that you have any loans, those have to be described, maturity dates, interest rates, that kind of thing. To the extent that you have a related party transaction, so that an owner of the company might benefit from some contract through another company he has or she has with the company, that needs to be disclosed. And finally, the financial statements that we've discussed.
All right. So, and those things you can get help with when you partner with a funding portal, and you've got an accountant working with you, and you're paying, those upfront costs that we talked about. That helps satisfy some of the burden of going through all of this and making sure that everything is right and tight before you start. So one question I have is, how long does this take? That's something that I think most businesses would want to know. Is this a 6-month process? Is this a 1-year process? Maybe Robin, you want to jump in there, or Samson?
Yeah, I can answer this. So typically, the regs allow you for 12 months for your campaign to be live. However, most of the campaigns, there's the myth that you can just put your deal up on a portal or a platform and people invest in it. They don't know who you are. They have no reason to trust you. And so part of that is you do have to put in a lot of work to engage your community. So regardless of which of the 70 plus platforms you pick, it's still up to you to do the marketing, the advertising. So you will see that some companies, say Hill from Gumroads, on Monday, he raised $5 million. It took him maybe 8 hours or so. Arlene Hamilton from Backstage Capital, she also raised she initially raised $1 million. Now she's up to like $3.5 million, all very quickly in less than a total 24 hours for her campaigns. Those people have put in a lot of sweat equity to build the crowd, the attention, to create the buzz so that when their deal goes live, then they can immediately have those people fund. You do have 12 months. Most of the quote unquote successful campaigns, they're looking at a less than 30-day window because they're really actively engaging their community of investors to get that going. Just keep in mind, you can run it for all 12 months. If you hit your goal in month 10, that's awesome. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But most quote unquote successful campaigns, they do fund within that first 30-day window.
And once you hit the goal, it's over. There's nothing more to be done. If you hit your goal in 24 hours, it's all over.
Oh, absolutely not. No. It means you have, hopefully, so Sahil has 3,737 investors on his cap table. You have a 3,700 member community that you need to manage. Raising money is actually just the start of the marathon, because now you need to deploy it, run a business, because you have 3,000 investors, 3,000 customers who you're now accountable for. So whenever you hit your cap, your goal, congratulations. That's when the actual marathon of running your business starts.
Right. And that's interesting that you talk about managing those people, because you do have to communicate with them. You have to let them know what's going on. And that's also an opportunity. It's important to distinguish. These are non-accredited investors. These are regular Joes and Janes who've decided to invest in your business. Can you describe a little bit about the difference between an accredited and non-accredited investor?
So accredited means that you make more than $200,000 a year for the last 2 years in a row, or if you're married, the couple has made more than $300,000, or you have more than $1 million in assets, excluding your primary residence. For retail investors, or what I like to just call investomers, because they're customer investors, your investors, they're your customers, and they make less than $200,000 a year. And so that's probably the majority of your customers, depending on your business. And so this is where you have an opportunity through the Jobs Act, Title III of the Jobs Act, where you can tap into those. I think it's 95% of America is retail investors. Tap into that 95% of Americans to see if they want, assuming they're over the age of 18, of course, assuming if they want to be an investor in your business. But again, you do have to keep in mind that for Reg CF, you can have both retail and accredited, are also known as sophisticated or institutional investors. One of the fun facts from 2020 is that 65% of the investors into Reg CF deals from 2020, they were institutional investors. They were your traditional sharks. So it's actually a good thing.
Yeah, that's fascinating, particularly if one of those institutional or quote sophisticated investors wants to be your lead guy or woman, right? So they come in and they're going to be putting in a big percentage of your raise. That means that it's perhaps easier to deal with one person, but you're also, that's the focus. You got to deal with that person.
Well, I would say that when you have these, so when all the small fish get together around the deal, the big fish come in, the sharks come in, the whales come in. On Twitter, it's a very interesting thing. There was a post by this gentleman. He said, if you have a waiting list, send me the link to your crowdfunding campaign, because I'm in. Because what that meant is you had a couple thousand people who did some manner of due diligence on you, or you were engaging your community who are already your customers. And the sharks, they know that, look, when they take customers, the lifetime value of a customer, when you turn them into an investor, it goes through the roof, particularly because of word of mouth referrals, lowering your customer acquisition costs. And so it's a great space. I often say that crowdfunding doesn't compete with VCs, because VCs, they really weren't looking at raising that sub 5 million mark, right? And really for small businesses, they're not looking at under 500,000, 250,000. But what happens, they see the traction. They're like, oh my goodness, this is a business. They've got this thing called revenue. They have huge traction because they just onboarded 3,000 of their community members as investors. Now all of a sudden, we went in on that deal. We don't even know what it is. We just know that they've got customers who are investing in this good product or service. And that's where regulation crowdfunding changes the dynamics.
Interesting. There was May mentioned a couple of times of one of the ways that you can convert some of this investment is through SAFE, a SAFE product. I'm not familiar with that. Does anyone know anything about that? What is SAFE?
I'll let Robin answer. It just stands for Simple Agreement for Future Equity. It's a pretty much boilerplate template that came out of a company called Y Combinator. It has its good things and bad things. But Robin, what else do you want to add to that?
I think that's a great snapshot. You know, it was a security instrument that was developed because the convertible note, which is kind of like its estranged sister, had certain attributes that weren't really that favorable in a seed stage company context. So a convertible note has an interest rate, a maturity date, and then for conversion mechanics, either a valuation cap, discount, or both. In a SAFE, the maturity date and interest rate have been eliminated. And what this does for founders and companies that are fundraising using this tool, it takes the pressure off the company needing to conduct a qualified financing, which would trigger the conversion of the instrument prior to the maturity date. And it also alleviates the scenario where the maturity date has arrived, there's been no triggering event to convert the instrument to equity, but the company doesn't have sufficient funds available to repay the note, right? Seed stage investors, they're not looking to get their money back. Like, unless they're investing in debt, if they're investing in a convertible note, their intention is not to get their 3, 4, 5% interest and get their money back after 18 months. They want equity of the same type that the Series A financing investors negotiate, but at a discounted price. So that's why they're doing it, right? That's the upside of a convertible security instrument. But when a company hasn't conducted, let's call it the 18-month maturity date, if they haven't conducted that price financing at that point, and the note reaches maturity, automatic conversion to common is a solution. Repayment is really not a solution. And what was happening in practice is that it created this point where investors were able to sort of renegotiate terms, like, oh, we'll give you an extension on that note if, right? And then there's the leverage. So the SAFE that Y Combinator developed took out the maturity date concept, reducing transaction costs, that leverage point, and really letting the founder just continue on naturally fundraising at the moment that they are able or that they see fit.
Sounds like an excellent option for businesses.
It's actually a really debatable security. There are people on both sides of the argument. I'm a big fan of the SAFE. I think that the SAFE is a great seed stage instrument for companies that are raising under, let's call it like 2 million. But there's a lot of dissent around this topic. I co-teach a class called Seed Investing with a gentleman named Joe Green, who's a Gunderson attorney and super knowledgeable, big writer. And he's written quite a bit on how unfair SAFEs are to investors. So it's important to kind of look at both sides of the analysis. In the crowdfunding context, SAFEs are prevalent and even promoted by some of the funding portals who have developed their own forms of SAFEs that almost all companies use when capital raising on their sites.
Fantastic. Thank you for that summary. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. I feel like we've been addressing some of the questions as they've come through on the chat. Are there other people here who haven't had a question that they want answered? I'm looking for additional input on, we have such a great panel here with such an array of expertise. If there are other questions that people want answered, please feel free to just go ahead and put them into the chat. If not, is there anything here that we haven't covered from our panelists that you'd like to weigh in on?
I would just like to add that raising money is hard. So I know we might be talking about, oh, it's super easy. You just do this, this, and this. No. It's hard. It's literally like training for a marathon. And so whether you're trying to raise venture capital, angel investment, or crowdfunding, it's a process. And so you do have to get your ducks in order. You need your video, particularly due to the pandemic. the warm intros, they've all gone digital. And in many ways, that's great because now it's like, oh, you can put your sizzle reel together. You can get your Form C, that resume for your company. And whether you're pitching to VCs, sharks, or angels, or you go on a FINRA approved platform, they all want to know the same exact information. What is your business? How are you going to make us money? Or how are you going to make us 100 or 1,000x return? And how do I invest in you? So when you go to raise, if you're thinking about raising money for your business, just remember it's hard. It's difficult. There's no guarantees. I like to tell people, I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I tell people I only recommend entrepreneurship to my enemies. That's just how hard it is. So the last point I want to stress to everyone, and the reason, so my name is Samson Williams. I'm the president of the Crowdfunding Professional Association. We're an advocacy group here in DC. We help write many of the rules that went into effect. We help shape those rules that went into effect on Monday that do raise the limit for Reg CF up to 5 million. They raise the limit for Reg A plus up to 75 million. But then they also address like testing the waters, blue sky rules, those nuances that you'll connect with Robin to learn more about and how they impact you. And so the reason I'm so passionate about crowdfunding is for a very simple premise. Customers have more money than VCs. I will fight on this hill to the end of me because your customers have more money than VCs. Typically, they use the business VCs use the business to put their hands into your customers' pockets. So if you get VC money, VCs say, thank you, I want my 10, my 100, my 10,000x return, and you get that from your customers. So if you have a business, you're thinking about looking for capital, raising money, just keep in mind, customers have more money than VCs, and whichever of the 70 plus FINRA approved portals you select, the goal of those portals is to connect your business with your customers. That's it.
That's a great way of saying it. Thank you for putting it that way, Samson. That clarifies a lot about the sort of dynamics of this process. Rivka, I want to bring you back into this. How are we doing on time, and what do you recommend? Should we try to get to some more questions here?
So I see a question here from Daniel about success stories for Reg CF. I already mentioned Dope Coffee. They only raised $85,000, but at the same time, they increased their revenue and their sales. Because remember, when you do a crowdfunding campaign, you're not just saying, buy my security, whatever it is. You're also saying, hey, you can buy my good product or service. So it's really a marketing campaign for your business. And one of your products is, if you love this so much, you can invest in our business. One of my other favorite ones, they've already closed, so it's not an issue if I talk about them, was Cornbread Hemp, which I think is a phenomenal name. They sell a CBD product. And again, they went to raise $100,000, and underneath where there's an exemption right now for COVID-19, that if you're looking to raise less than $250,000, you can have reviewed versus audited financials. This is just something for COVID-19 exemption. I forget when it expires. I think it's September or May of next year.
You don't even need a review. Just to correct, under the 250 during this relief period, it's just CEO certified as opposed to reviewed, which eliminates that CPA cost.
Yes, and that's super important. Thank you, Robin, keeping me honest. And so what Cornbread Hemp did, they only went to raise $107,000. But as they came up to that cap, they were like, oh, we're oversubscribed. We're going to raise over $107,000. So they updated their information to the SEC, and they actually raised $485,000 from, I want to say, 827 investors. And so again, this is a success story because you can start by saying, hey, we might only need $100,000 for a piece of equipment to carry us over for a little bit of time. But if you have that traction, if you've gained that traction, talk to Robin. She'll still tell you how to set it up so that, oh, you're going to go past $100,000 or even $250,000. Here's what you can do after that to help your raise go, to help your cap move up, because you may not need 5 million, but if you have the community that has interested in funding you up to that amount, then you definitely want to keep them engaged, because those are going to be your customers, and your customers are your lifeblood of your business.
Well, it sounds like a really successful Reg CF campaign could actually make you rethink the arc and scope of your business. In other words, I was going to grow at this amount, but I have so much support, and now I've got this capital coming in. I should figure out what to do. Maybe I move faster, maybe I expand, maybe I take on another product, that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. And don't worry about the sharks will tell you that, oh, you don't want 3,000, 5,000 people on your cap table. Well, when you're a greedy shark, that's true, because you want to take the big bite. But this is where, oh, and this is super important. It's about 63% of founders are out of their businesses within 18 months when they receive VC investments, because you probably work for them, because 99% of the time you sign their term sheet. And when you sign a shark's term sheet, you're on the menu. I know I'm not beating up on VCs. I'm just saying it's all sharks for a reason. And so if you're looking to raise capital, you should consider investment crowdfunding, because you get to set your own terms. When you talk to Steven, he's going to help you write terms that are favorable for you and attractive, not only for the retail, your actual customers, but also for those bigger fish like the sharks and the whales.
Yeah, it sounds like a way you're also protecting yourself against an unwanted invasion. I mean, that is one of the things that does happen when you go to the VC crowd, is you get all the money up front and you get some expertise from their business experience, but you also get this invasive predator who wants to take more and more of your business.
They can have, one quick thing on VCs. They raise funds and they're looking for 10, 20x return. They can often push you to do something you don't want as a founder. And they, fight for board seats and control, and it ends up antagonistic, in certain cases. That's basically a fact of life with VCs. They're looking for the high rate of return, because a lot of the things they're investing in are not going to pan out. So they want to get to 10, 20x rate of return and fast, and often have different goals than the founders have, and can force you to do things that you don't ultimately want to do, that aren't in your interest or your board's interest or your customers either.
And I think also you're talking about with customers investing in your business, they understand and appreciate that authenticity, right? The genuineness of what you're trying to do. They get you because they like your product, they like your business.
Absolutely. I'm super excited about all the restaurants who are looking at crowdfunding, because I like to tip 20%. I used to be a bathroom valet at Rainforest Cafe. It was one of my first jobs as a 14-year-old. And so I can't wait till restaurants open back up so I can, because right now I haven't been able to go outside, go and eat in restaurants. And so this is a really good opportunity for those restaurants to develop. We're already lifelong customers of our favorite restaurants. And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of restaurants due to the pandemic. And so if you give me an opportunity, I already know your food's amazing. I already know all of your staff. I missed them all because I haven't seen them in a year. And now you're giving me a way so that I can skip the line and not have to wait. And well, that already sort of happens at some of my favorite restaurants. I eat there so much. But this is where you're looking at what's the lifetime value of a VC or an institutional investor versus 500 or 1,000 customers who are going to come back to your restaurant. And so this is where we get into the nuts and bolts of the math. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, now I understand that the Jobs Act stands for Jumpstart Our Businesses and Startups, because in 2020, we had over 30,000 jobs created via Reg CF raises. And that's amazing because we're in the middle of a pandemic.
That's great. That's an amazing stat, Samson. Fantastic to hear that.
I stole that from Sherwood Nice, AKA Woody. He runs a Capital Crowdfunding Advisors. He produces an excellent report on this every year.
Great. Thanks again. Rivka, I think we're kind of rounding it out here. It looks like we don't have any more questions, and I think we've really covered a lot of ground. I personally want to thank you guys. What an amazing panel this has been. Hopefully that this will encourage the participants to consider this type of crowdfunding. And Rivka, I'll hand it back to you.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you all so much. And, I hope people are excited. Definitely our webinar next week on the 24th will be all about digital marketing. So that seems like it's the perfect webinar to companion with this one. And that's going to be with Danny Shapuri of DNA marketing, and also Sarah Bradbury, who's the content marketer, DNA's digital niche agency, if you want to look it up, and Jessica Baker, who's the founder of Ad Align and Lives Align. And Brad will be back to host that one as well, doing such a great job. So yes, and I will also be sending this recording out to all of you who watched, and thank you for your participation, for your awesome questions. And again, thank you so much to this panel. You guys were really, really amazing, and this was a great gift. Thank you.
Thank you, Rivka.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to Danny, too.